welcome. Thank you very much for joining as we talk about the EU's autonomous trade defense instruments. This is Constanze, one of our policy analysts. I'm Josefa, the research economist, and we are part of Politico's Research and Analysis Division, which publishes in-depth, data-driven analysis on pressing policy issues. So we decided to look into the EU's autonomous trade defense instruments. So we decided to look into the EU's autonomous trade defense instruments as in time where geopolitical tensions flare up, these instruments have become crucial for the EU to adapt to these developments and to counter the attempt of third countries to weaponize its globally integrated economic flows. So the EU has introduced 4 autonomous tools recently, and we will present them to you in the following slides. And they are autonomous because they apply the same rule to all trade partners, and they can be grouped into defensive and retaliatory tools. And the defensive one aim to detect and prevent foreign interference in investments done in Europe, and the retaliatory ones aim to respond to external actions done by third countries that put the EU at a disadvantage. And you can see that this distinction can also be seen in practice, as the defensive tools have seen a high number of notification and decisions, whereas the retaliatory ones have seen close to none. So the foreign direct investment screening is a defensive tool, and it was designed to protect the EU from external risk threatening its security. And as you can see, the vast majority of formally screened investment cases are authorized without any conditions, as shown in dark blue on the graph. And a smaller share are authorized with condition and remedies, as shown in light blue in the graph. And only a minimal share of 1% get blocked, as shown in dark green, highlighting the EU's current broader openness to foreign investments under the current regulation. And as of today, member countries are required and are not required to have a screening mechanism in place, but at the same time are responsible for doing the screening, which has led to an uneven and fragmented enforcement, and which the ongoing revision of the regulation aims to address by seeking to introduce a mandatory screening mechanism for all member countries, which, however, needs to be carefully balanced against the need to avoid deterring legitimate investors.
The other defensive instrument is the foreign subsidy regulation. So the EU has always had an approach of trying to curb the use of state aid, which is not like our Chinese and US counterparts that have a much more expansive use of subsidization for their companies. And so this foreign subsidy regulation tried to bridge the gap that was left in the WTO regulations that only target goods. And we clearly see that there was a gap, because in the use of that instrument, we have seen since its implementation around 179 mergers and acquisition filings, 200 public procurement procedures, and a number of ex officio cases. But what is really interesting is that despite China not being leading in those procedures, it is definitely leading in the in-depth investigations that the Commission has chosen to lead. So as you can see on the graph, there's 5 out of 6 in-depth investigations are linked to China, with the 6th one being the United Arab Emirates, the EPFE case. The next instrument that is also linked to procurement is a retaliatory one, which is the International Procurement Instrument. That one tries to re-level the playing field, as other partners are much more closed in their approach to public procurement, and the EU wanted to try and force reciprocity and openness of the markets. However, since its implementation, we've only seen one ex officio case from the Commission on the China's medical devices market, which has only been recently concluded. And you can still see that the top procurement spenders on the graph there, China and the US, have a domestic preference clause where the EU currently doesn't have one. That might still change in the very near future. And so that will also signal that maybe this instrument doesn't work as well as it should to induce reciprocity.
The anti-coercion instrument is a retaliatory tool and was mainly designed to deter, but if necessary also to counter economic coercion from third countries. And the instrument has never been used, but examining the EU's most important trade relation, it reveals clear pressure points where it could become relevant in the future. So the two graphs show the corruption index of the most important trade partners of the EU, serving as a trustworthiness score, plotted against their share in EU's exports and imports. And you can see that the graph on the left shows that the United States dominates the EU exports, revealing the vulnerability of Europe's industries to trade tensions. And the graph on the right shows that China dominates the EU's imports despite a low trustworthiness score, highlighting the need for a credible instrument to deter coercion. However, the capability of the instrument to deter depends on a large extent to a decisive and reliable execution, which, however, has been questioned lately, as despite repeated calls in response to trade tensions, the instrument has never been activated, risking to leave the instrument rather symbolic and therefore meaningless.
So what the analysis of these four instruments shows is that despite having this extensive toolbox, the EU's approach remains quite fragmented and mostly reactive. The EU's trade posture has been shifting in the last decade. We've seen it not in the external rulebook, but also in the internal rulebook, with the new state aid framework and the new public procurement procedures, as I mentioned. And so those show us that the EU is becoming more protectionist, even if it doesn't say it quite yet. What the EU needs next is to address its short-termist thinking and get a good dose of realism in there as well. 10 years ago, China adopted its industrial strategy for 2025 and told us exactly where it was headed. Despite this, the EU woke up too late and now realized that it had quite severe economic dependencies and that it needed to address those. A similar thing happened with Russia and the EU's energy policy that we are now still scrambling to untie. And looking at our dependencies with the US, a similar thing could happen, especially in terms of digital services. And as we've seen in the graph, the pressure points are quite are quite present. What the EU can do is strengthen its cross-sectoral vision and really use all of the tools that are in its toolbox more broadly. We specifically dove into trade instruments for economic security, but the EU does have other tools that can fight social or environmental dumping as well, and those can be leveraged for the economic security goal. I'm thinking of the CBAM and forced labor ban. Those two could really enhance the EU's goals of economic security. In that strategic thinking as well, and in our analysis, we found that the Commission's use of its ex officio procedures, so the own initiative procedures, are quite a very efficient tool, as they can really target issues where they are the most necessary, as the Commission has a much broader overview of things. And so that, because the ex officio procedure exists throughout all of the mechanisms, it should be used more consistently. Ultimately, the EU does have a strong arsenal, but the core of the issue is really the deterrence paradox, as my colleague said. And it's that if we hesitate to use that arsenal, we will no longer be seen as a credible threat. In any case, here is the QR code for the rest of our analysis. Thank you for your attention, and we're happy to discuss some questions and discussions at the networking break that's happening right now in the main networking area.